Praise the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. He has given us new life and hope.
Good morning, it's Wednesday, the 29th of April. This is Europe Today, and I'm Marat Gwyn, coming to you live from Brussels with the news and analysis to start your day. Coming up on today's show, Péter Magyar, the incoming Hungarian Prime Minister, is in Brussels today for high-level talks on unlocking EU funds withheld from Hungary under Orbán. He'll be meeting the presidents of the European Commission and Council. Hungary risks losing out on 10 billion euros in post-pandemic recovery funds unless a deal is reached by August. And the EU has said it's ready to sanction Israeli entities after reports that a ship carrying grain from Russian-occupied Ukraine has arrived at an Israeli port. It sparked a diplomatic row between Ukraine and Israel, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also pushing for sanctions. Also today, amid an ongoing standoff between the US and Iran, the European Commission President will later this morning address the European Parliament on the war in the Middle East and its consequences on energy markets and European pockets. Some EU leaders have suggested the intervention from Brussels has not been robust enough. But first, this morning, Hungary's incoming Prime Minister Péter Magyar is meeting European Commission President von der Leyen in Brussels later today as Hungary races to salvage billions of euros in EU funding blocked under Orbán. For more, I'm joined by our Europe editor, Maria Tadeo, who will be following Magyar's trip today. Maria, big moment. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, yes, Merit. And look, there's a lot of hype around this visit and there's a lot of expectation around it. But at some point, we've got to move on into the substance. And that is really the point of this visit, which is unusual because Péter Magyar is not yet the Prime Minister of Hungary. So in terms of the meetings today, there will be a one-to-one with the head of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, TISA party. So the party, of course, Péter Magyar says that these are going to be informal talks precisely because he's not yet in government. But these are urgent and very much needed talks because the country is now looking to salvage, as you say, 10 billion euros by the end of August. If they do not manage to get to an agreement to push through some of the reforms that will be necessary, particularly when it comes to rule of law, the country will lose out on billions. So that is the number one priority for the incoming Hungarian Prime Minister. And then secondly, he will also meet with Antonio Costa, the head of the European Council. And that matters politically because, of course, we have to go back now to Viktor Orbán. He had really pushed this policy of the veto policy on common measures by the 27 to the extreme. This had become incredibly tense among the EU Council, but there was also really a question about how can an EU work and operate when you have a country internally that will veto time and time and again all of these major policies. So the goal now is to move into the politics. As I say, however, these are difficult talks and will become difficult talks because Péter Magyar has to do a very delicate balancing act. On the one hand, he obviously wants to reinsert Hungary in the political conversation. He also wants to salvage the money. He needs it if he wants to turn around the Hungarian economy. But at the same time, and this is critical, he cannot be seen, certainly not among his domestic audience, as a man who is simply taking orders from Brussels. He cannot be seen as a yes man to Ursula von der Leyen. So these are going to be, no doubt, difficult talks, but they begin today. And now, Merit, on that note, let's go now to Strasbourg because we are joined by Roxana Mînzatu. Of course, she is the Executive Vice President at the Commission for Social Rights and Skills. As I say, she joins us from Strasbourg. Commissioner, thank you very much. Today, you're going to present a plan to combat poverty in the EU. This is a big topic for Europeans, but I have to ask you first about the politics because we are seeing big changes in Bulgaria, a new government, perhaps seen as too close to Russia. And in your own country, Romania, the government is on the brink of collapse, aided by the far right. Are you concerned that both Bulgaria and Romania are moving away from a pro-European path?
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. Well, I will not comment the political situations in our member states, but I will say this, that in the end, democracy is the strongest asset of the European Union. And elections and democratic movements are part of this process, people being able to express themselves. And this is part of the game, I would say. What we do follow is the pro-European stance of our citizens. And looking at the numbers in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Hungary, the very high number of support towards the European Union, the way they understand that their country has benefited from belonging to the European project. This is something that we see in Brussels, in Strasbourg. This is something that politicians in the capitals also see. And so their actions are driven by this pro-European position of their own peoples. I'm absolutely convinced.
Just to be very clear on this, because this is a critical point, you're saying that both in Bulgaria but also Romania, a country that you know well, you believe that if there's a change in government, it will stay on a pro-European path. You do not fear a Eurosceptic turn, just to be very clear.
I'm absolutely counting on the pro-European stance of every member state. The country that I know best is a country with people that are very attached to the European project, different ages, different social groups. So counting on that to be the main driver of democracy as has always been. And beyond that, Romania has always been a country on which the EU has deeply relied. So really this for sure will be the reality in the future as well.
Okay, and it's also critical for security through NATO. Commissioner, let's also now go into let's go into the plan that you're presenting today, because the idea of poverty, this is a growing concern for Europeans who find that they work, but they cannot make at times make it to the end of the month comfortably. What are you pitching?
So actually next week on the 6th of May, I will present a social package, our first ever European anti-poverty strategy, looking at a tough reality that 1 out of 5 Europeans, that's 93 million people, are at risk of poverty and social exclusion. Many affected by in-work poverty, as you've mentioned, many living from salary to salary. So obviously it is important that we present the right tools to support on a lifelong cycle, and this is new to our approach, people that are not just already affected by poverty, by low income, by lack of access to services, but to prevent these situations. And the main rationale beyond everything is that we cannot build competitiveness based on social fragility. So first and foremost, we need to address this fragility. And you will see the package, the strategy will present tools that will address, first of all, child poverty, because the earliest we intervene, the better it is for the way that our societies will evolve. So we will present a reinforced child guarantee, which is our main tool to make sure that children are not affected by their families' vulnerabilities, and that we are helping them go to school, have access to medical health care, to support services. So this is quite central to the strategy. But as I've mentioned, in-work poverty, people that are active are also be central to this, but also we will look at people outside the labor market. 50 million Europeans are not looking for a job. They cannot work. So we also want to tackle these categories with an array of measures that member states, because indeed fighting poverty is member states' competence, will deploy.
Indeed, but I just want to ask you, perhaps as a final point here, do you have the means and the tools to do this? Because a lot of these policies are driven by the capitals, but also do you have the funding? We're seeing competing interests from defense to hard economy, competitiveness. Do you have the tools, just financial means, to implement these policies?
It's a team effort. The European Commission and European Union provide, first and foremost, the European Social Fund as a support for member states. In our proposal for the next MFF, this fund has an overall 100 billion budget. Now Parliament proposed an increase. Then you will see in the strategy a number of solutions, while that will be based on European investment products and on leveraging also private resources. So obviously stimulating member states to invest and having a coherent framework on this. But what is essential is that we want that the anti-poverty efforts are coordinated at the highest level, and that they are central to the political agenda. And this is the main work because, as I've said, we cannot build competitiveness on social fragility, and we need to be engaged with this mindset.
With the member states and, of course, the working poor, that is an increasing concern for Europeans. Executive Vice President, thank you so much for joining us on Europe Today.
And thank you so much to you, Maria, for that, and to your guests, of course, the European Commission Vice President Roxana Mînzatu. But we're moving on now. Brussels has said it stands ready to sanction entities and individuals in Israel after reports that a ship carrying grain from Russian-occupied Ukraine has arrived at the Israeli port of Haifa. The European Commission says it has approached the Israeli Foreign Affairs Ministry on the issue. For more, I'm joined in the studio now by our Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Bakulina. Good morning, Sasha. Can you first bring us to speed here? How did this ship end up in an Israeli port?
Let's take a step back and see how this grain, Ukrainian grain, ended up on the ship. Now, Panormitis is carrying over 6,000 tons of wheat, and a large bulk of it is coming from the port of Berdyansk. Berdyansk is a small port on a coast of Ukraine's Sea of Azov. Now, the ship was loaded with grain from occupied territories of Ukraine, and then these ships loaded it on Panormitis, which is a geared bulk carrier, which then proceeded towards Israel and is currently standing in the waters next to the port of Haifa since the 25th of April, Marit. And this is what Ukrainians are asking Israel to do, not to allow the ship to dock and not to unload that wheat.
But initially we had a bit of a pushback against the allegations from Israel. Are there signs now that the Israeli government is listening?
Not yet, but there are signs that they are escalated even more, because Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky stepped in and he said that Russia is systemically seizing grain on temporarily occupied Ukrainian land and organizing its export through individuals linked to the occupiers. Such schemes violate the laws of the state of Israel itself. Now, Israel also reacted, rejecting what was called by Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar Twitter diplomacy. He said the vessel has not entered the port. It is not possible to verify the truth of the Ukrainian claims. Now, in response to that, Kyiv actually released the full timeline of the previous case of the ship Abinsk, which docked and unloaded in Israel in the same port of Haifa in mid-April. And Ukrainians said they did transfer all the official communication and requests to Israeli officials, asking them not to let that happen.
Okay, Sasha, thank you so much. And we'll be keeping an eye out on any updates on that story, of course. But now the European Parliament's plenary session continues today in Strasbourg, with the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen joining a debate on the Middle East later this morning. But there's also plenty of talk about the EU's long-term budget, which is currently under negotiation. For more, we can cross over to Strasbourg now and to our correspondent Vincenzo Genovese. Vincenzo, welcome back to the programme. Yesterday, we know the Parliament adopted its own position on the EU's long-term budget, which runs for 7 years from 2028. Tell us more.
Yes, Mared, indeed. Good morning. Good morning from Strasbourg. The MEPs want more money, as expected, in the EU's 7-year budget. They are calling for a 10% increase compared to the proposal put forward by the European Commission last July, bringing it up to over 2 trillion euro, which is 1.27% of the EU's GNI. Why this increase? Because they are seeking more funding for defense, competitiveness, strategic priorities, but without cutting allocations for agriculture, fisheries, cohesion policy, or programs such as Erasmus. So this is an ambitious target and will very likely clash with EU member states, which are always reluctant to increase their national contributions to the EU budget. Tough negotiations between MEPs and national governments are expected in the next months. Each side will try to push its own priority, and who better than Sophie Wilmès to discuss it? She is an MEP, she is the Vice President of the European Parliament, but she was Prime Minister of Belgium. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning.
Will the European Parliament bow to the pressure of the member states at the end, like it was in the previous budget talks?
But we are at the beginning of the discussion, and it's normal that everybody is playing a role. I had the chance to sit in both situations, in the Parliament side, but also at the Council side. It's very normal, and it's usual that the member states are pushing for a budget a little bit down, while the Parliament is pushing for more. The reality is that we are facing a lot of new challenges. You talk about it, competitiveness, our autonomical strategy, but we're also having challenges on security and defense, and those requires more money for sure.
Moving on to today's agenda of the European Parliament, there is an important vote on the rule of law report. You have worked on this file. Can you tell us which member states are, let's say, the bad kids in Europe now?
So actually the report of the European Parliament, we try not to name and shame. We were really focused on transversal and horizontal issues. Of course, we could not make a report without speaking about Hungary. That's totally normal. What is very special this time is that we speak about an integrated cycle for the rule of law, which is something that I have carried for more than a year now and is now a reality in this report.
As you mentioned Hungary, and as Peter Magyar is in Brussels today, can the new government put the things back on track in Hungary?
You know, it's much more difficult to put things back on track than to dismantle rule of law, and we've seen that everywhere. We are very hopeful for this new team and this new government to put things on track. They say they will, and I think that we need to support that.
Today on the agenda there is also a debate on anti-Semitism, which seems to be in rise in Europe. Do you see this it's connected to Israel's geopolitical agenda?
So it doesn't seem to be rising in Europe. It is rising in Europe, and it is definitely rising since the attack of the 7th of October. What we need to make very a cautious distinction between the government in Israel and the Jewish community. And whatever a minister or a government does not excuse anti-Semitic action. And this is something that we need to tackle now. There is a roadmap and there is a strategy for anti-Semitism from the European Commission. We wanted to update it since it was born 2 years before the attack.
And last question, as you are a vice chair of the EU-US relation committee, do you think that the EU should do or can do without the US?
I think that Europe should do with Europe and does not prevent it from doing with the US but also other partners. But what is very important regarding the United States is that we are talking to each other as equal partner and not as a big brother against the little brother or the little sister. That's not the way I see things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and of course we will follow debates and votes here in Strasbourg. By the way, Marek, there was another interesting vote yesterday, but I will leave this to you in Brussels.
Indeed, Vincenzo, thank you so much for that, and thank you to your guest, the former Belgian Prime Minister and European Parliament Vice President, Sophie Wilmès. Now, as Vincenzo suggested there, we're moving from politics to pets, because yesterday in Strasbourg, the European Parliament passed the first ever EU rules to protect cats and dogs, banning abusive practices and establishing minimum welfare standards. So, what actually changes? Jakub Janus explains.
Yesterday, the European Parliament delivered a sign of humanity for our four-legged companions. The first ever EU law on the welfare of dogs and cats has officially passed, transforming how pets are bred, sold and tracked across the continent. So if you have a pet, here is how it works. At its heart is a 100% traceability rule. So no more anonymous puppy farms or shadowy online deals. Every dog and cat in the EU must now be microchipped and registered. So if you are buying a pet online, where over 60% of sales now happen, you will finally be able to verify the breeder's credentials before you commit. Okay, so what's the deadline? The clock is ticking for professional breeders and shelters. They have 4 years to meet new housing and care standards. And for private owners, the shift is much gentler, with a 10-year window for dogs and 15-year window for cats. And it might seem long, but it is by design. It allows current pets to live out their lives as they are, ensuring that eventually every pet in the EU will have been born directly into this new system of traceability. And looking ahead, the European Commission has also committed to digitizing the pet passport within the next 2 years, making it much harder for traffickers to hide behind fake documents. So, we should all celebrate, especially this little one.
That was Jakub Janis reporting there, but that's all we have time for today. We'll be back again tomorrow with the last show of this week. In the meantime, keep up to date with more of our reporting on Euronews and Euronews.com. You can also get in touch with us. Email us at europetoday@euronews.com with your questions and your feedback. And we'll see you again at the same time tomorrow.
On the business agenda.
What do we know about the viral claims of Iranian protesters facing execution?